folks so much for joining. We have an action-packed webinar for you folks with Asif and Rajat. Just to get, I know we're all in budgeting season right now. We're in the process of freezing our budgets. One of the biggest unknowns, known unknowns, has become SaaS spends. So what we really want to dive into is get Asif and Rajat's expert viewpoint on how are they forecasting their SaaS spends in 2023, especially in this macro environment. Finance, procurement, business systems leaders, business operations leaders, all of us are sitting in rooms and having these conversations and on Zooms multiple times in a week to figure this out right now. So Asif and Rajat are probably the best people to do this as well. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Spendflo, but just prior to Spendflo, I used to lead the business operations team at a high growth company called Volta Charging. We went through this process multiple times, very painful, on how we actually buy, renew, and manage all our SaaS spends. Inspired me to actually start a company to say, hey, I think the world needs a better way to do this. And that's how Spendflo really came about. So what we do at Spendflo is we help companies buy, manage, and renew all your SaaS spends in one single place, right? And we get you guaranteed savings on them as well. Just before we kick it off, I'd love for Asif to introduce himself and then followed up by Rajat as well.
Thanks, Sid. So my name is Asif. I have about 12 plus years of experience in FP&A, which is budgeting, forecasting, and I also have worked in audit and tax before that. So in my present role at Coursera, I lead the FP&A team for Asia and India, and I have been living and breathing FP&A for about 7 to 8 years now. I've also written a book on FP&A.
That's awesome. Where can they find the book, Asif?
They should be able to find it on Amazon. So if they search on Amazon, it should be available in December. So it's available in India right now, but outside India, it will be available in December.
We all know that now we live in a subscription economy. SaaS spend just last year was about 167 billion. It's now risen to about 195 billion. It's growing an average of about 20 to 23% year on year. Just the market per se, right? So you can imagine how it's growing inside organizations at a much faster clip. SaaS spends have also become one of the largest spends inside an organization as well. SaaS spend in most of these organizations is still growing at 25% year on year. We assume that it could reduce, but actually spend is actually growing within these organizations. The average SaaS spend per employee has become about $7,000 per employee per year. That was only $5,000 in the last just 18 months ago. That spend has actually grown. And we expect it to either stay at 7,000 or grow a little bit in the next year as well. Companies use an average of over 100 plus SaaS tools today in the mid-market. If you grow closer to the enterprise, it's over 250 different SaaS tools today. Just wanted to share these insights. We have more coming your way as well. Typical reason why this process is really hard is that the buying and management of SaaS has become really challenging right now. It's because of the opacity of pricing today. You have no idea what to pay for your SaaS tools. It's also a very decentralized buying and renewal process. You have at least an average of 50 different stakeholders inside the organization who are responsible for buying, managing, and renewing 120 different SaaS tools today on average. You get no centralized visibility into contract data, spend data, usage data, and employee sentiment data, right? Whether it's valuable or not is a very difficult decision to make. And on average, people are spending about five hours on every renewal or every procurement today. So these are typical challenges we see across the buying and management cycle. And as a result, Gartner keeps saying that there's about $90 billion of SaaS spend that's wasted every year. We understand why, and we'll also explore how you can actually forecast this out in the next year. So Asif, just wanted to kick it off from you, right? What is your present budgeting process? You've probably done this multiple times. You've been in FP&A for a while, right? And what does that budgeting process look like? Where do you even start? And do you have do you actually have a set process in place?
Sure, Sid. So we do have actually a 4-step process that we can go through right now. So before even we start about thinking about starting the budgeting process for the SaaS expenses, the first step is to have all the data that we will need for that process at one place. And that is the challenge a lot of small and mid-sized organizations face, especially if they don't have a contract management system in place. But if we do have a contract management system in place, and if we can capture the right information, it's very easy. So depending on the situation where you are in, it can be very easy or very difficult to get all that information that you need to do the budget. A list of all the tools that you are using currently. What are the contract value of each of them? What's the term of contract? Is it a 1 year contract or a multi-year contract? And when is that contract next due for renewal? So those are some of the basic information that you might need while you start the budgeting process for your SaaS spends.
Makes sense. And Rajat, I'll just the same question over to you. When you've done this Mindtickle and from your experience, right? We all know how hard it is to centralize this data. What are some typical challenges that you see, and some way for, some hacks that you have for the audience as well?
Yeah, so great question, Sid. So yeah, so I guess there are multiple challenges in order to collate the data, because the data is not centralized. The data is decentralized with multiple buyers in the multiple time duration or journey of their life cycle, right? So whenever we start this, like we started this process earlier, we realized that there were certain tools in the long tail which were being expensed like for years and years without having any use, right? There were certain tools which were bought by someone with their own personal card and being expensified by them on their tools. So it's a lot of unknowns in this process, which you need to actually get it to known by a certain manual effort, or with a certain tool like SaaS management tool, etc. Like you need to be into a mindset of first collating or centralizing your SaaS data, and that's the role of a central team that we had at Mindtickle, where the first job that we did is to centralize the data. It was a 2 or 3 months process that we put into, and we reached out to each and every stakeholders and leadership, and then collate that data, verified the data multiple times, and created a particular sheet where we have at least basic details of all the tools.
What is the process that you actually instilled inside Mindtickle at some point to hey, like I realized that the pain is in the actual root causes, actually in the buying, not post buying, right? So how did you actually tackle that?
So whenever somebody is bypassing us, or whenever somebody is just buying the tool by themselves, finance team will not pay for them. So that's the first hard stop or hard process that we brought in order to curb the decentralization of this tool buying and procurement. And then we instill a process where they can request to us, and we'll validate and verify the requirement of all the applications and the renewals. And then we'll took a certain decision in order to change the complete procurement process to a certain process which can be monitored across their life cycle.
Makes sense. And on average, like one thing that we notice as well, Asif, from your standpoint, what do you actually see as a process that really works, right? How have you tackled that at the source, which is are my renewals and buying going through a centralized team? And if they're not, how did I actually get it there? Did you go through that process yourself?
Yeah, so I worked at a couple of companies. It was very different in both. So in one company, it was all centralized, where you had to take approval of IT and procurement, where whenever you needed a tool, that was the place where you want to be in, where there is ownership, and there's one or two single source of procurement where that it is being approved. In the other case, which was a smaller company, there we didn't have any single point of ownership, where anybody in the organization, especially in the leadership team, could make that decision if they needed a tool for their team. And then there used to be issues, they coming back after purchasing the tool, and maybe there was a tool in the organization which we didn't know of. So the first is the situation where ideally we should supposed to aim to be in.
Yeah, makes sense. And then It's actually very interesting. What we also see in most organizations is that one of the best ways, the central source of your data right now to go grab this information is probably your AP inbox, right? It's your invoices in your AP inbox and a bunch of your credit card statements. So you can actually, it's fairly simple to just grab this information from your AP inbox on what are the tools being used and how much you're paying for them. And the second source of truth is actually the best source of truth we've realized is actually the vendors for all the renewal dates. Once you have the name of the vendors, reaching out to the vendors actually to get contract data and renewal data, if you did not have a centralized flow and you had to do this for the first time before insisting on a flow in the future, reaching out to the vendors is a very, very good hack to find renewal data, terms of contract and all of that information. And usually end of the year, we see this happening a lot across the org as well. So just tidbits for the audience. What do you think is step two?
Again, the step two is, look, after the step one where you have got some visibility on your SaaS spend, the next is to categorize them into the committed, non-committed spend. Like, what do you mean by committed and non-committed? Committed spend is where you actually have committed the money already to the vendor for the next year, and you do not have any authority in order to change that, right? And the non-committed spend is where you know that your renewal will be happening in the next year and you can take decision, and then based on the decision you can do something. In the committed spend, you can still do some negotiation. You can still do some negotiation internally as well as externally, and that's what we did at Mindtickle during the COVID time and during this macroeconomic crisis as well. We created the value chart, which you can see on the screen. The value chart has the x-axis as the sentiment score of the customer. So this we have taken every time whenever there is a renewal. It's because basically it's 2 to 3 months before renewal, or you can do it quarterly as well. On the y-axis is the criticality, which again we have taken from the employees and their admins, right? So this is a chart that you can create for yourself, where based on the customer sentiment and based on the criticality, you can actually identify the tools which you want to replace, renew, retire, or negotiate. So let's say if your customer sentiment score is high, which means your internal users are using the tool and they're showing some positive sentiment on the tool. But if the criticality, which is again a question to the admins and the user, if it's low, then obviously then you need to negotiate, because it's kind of you're putting it in a high expense category. But if it's high in the sentiments and it's high on the criticality, then obviously you need to renew. Then you need to have your renewal plan, where you need to actually get into a process of what to renew, how to renew, and also at what price you can renew. If the sentiment score is low, if the users are not happy and the criticality is also not pretty high, then the obvious decision is to retire the tool. If the sentiment score is low, but the criticality of the tool is high because it's actually helping you in defining certain processes, then obviously the tool is being required, but it's not helping the end users, then the right decision is to replace it with some tool which can be used by the user.
Yeah, and Asif, just to your point as well, just for you to dive in, how do you look at committed and non-committed spend as well, and how do you actually dive into this process in your world?
Yeah, so it's exactly the way Rajat defined in terms of committed and non-committed, in terms of how we split. What we look for committed is, do we want to get away from any of the committed spends? There can be any reason for it. And if we do that, are there any financial consequences for it? What are the penalties that we need to pay? If there's something that we are going to terminate, how much will it cost us? So that is something we need to keep in mind. And similarly for non-committed tools, if there are some tools which are going to be up for renewal in the next year, but we for sure know that we're going to use it for the next 4, 5, 10 years, softwares like Slack or Zoom that we know will not be changing. And if those tools are in a, say, 1-year contract, which might be costing us more, we could negotiate a multi-year contract where we can get a better rate. So yeah, those are the things I could think of. But the way we classify as committed and non-committed is exactly the way Rajat mentioned.
Got it. Interestingly enough, like how do you actually like get this categorization? Because this is really hard, right? Like you have what 150 tools, 200 tools. Like how do you actually grab this data? How do you actually do you just email a bunch of these admins? Do you send them like surveys? What do you actually end up doing, Asif, like from your experience?
So the data that we collected in step 1 that had a contract end date. So it's a simple look up on that data. Whatever contract is ending in the next year, that will be non-committed, and whatever contract is ending after the next year ends, that will be a committed spend for the next year. So it's
Got it.
based on the contract end date. In most cases, if you cannot figure out, like if you don't know the contract end date, then you should reach out to your IT partner or your procurement partner. If not, then the vendor would be
Yeah.
the best
Yeah,
person to
and
tell you.
Rajat, like to get the value, right? This map that we're talking about and this categorization, it's tricky, right? If like in your first couple of versions of this, how did you actually end up doing something like this?
The first thing that we did, Sid, is basically did quarterly webinars or quarterly meetings with our stakeholders. That is the first point, right? So first you need to understand from the stakeholders and the admins on the tools that are actually being used by them, and they'll define the criticality for you. That is the first point. So every quarter you need to meet with them. Every quarter you need to understand from them that this tool is a must have, this tool is being used, there is a particular kind of usage that is being shown. Then the next process is, as Asif mentioned, right, 2 or 3 months before the renewal, there is a process that we initiate. In
Yeah.
that process, then you need to ask the users about whether they are liking the tool or not, whether the success that we expect them to be achieving from the tool, whether they're getting that success or not. So there are a certain there is a certain template of questions that we ask to the end users, and based on the response, then we define then we give certain kind of flexibility to the admins in order to make us understand whether the tool is critical or not.
I'll come back to how you can actually make it scalable as well and what we've experienced just in our customer base as well. So how do you actually make this internal pitch is why this graph is actually has been quite helpful for a lot of the customers as well. So I'll actually go into step 3, Asif. Like what is step 3 and how do you actually start doing this?
So we already covered the existing spends. We looked at committed and non-committed, but there will be new spends that are planned in the budget for next year. So if your organization is planning for any new projects, any growth opportunities that they are pursuing, that along with headcount and marketing spend will also involve some of the forecasting, some of the software or the SaaS spends as well. So one thing you could do here is while you're collecting information for the headcount and marketing, you usually roll out a template to the business heads where they need to fill up how much headcount they will need for the new project, how much, say, contractors they need for the new project, or how much they will spend in terms of marketing. We could add another question or another point to it, asking them if they will need any technology support or if they will need a new software for this. And if yes, then what will be the budget in terms of how much they are expected to spend on that software. So that's how you will get any new spends that are planned, the business is planning to include it in their budget next year.
At what point in the budgeting process do you do this, right? Do you do it parallelly do you do it when you're actually grabbing all your SaaS data, like essentially all centralizing your data, or when do you actually kick off this, this survey to your department heads?
Yeah. So there's no hard and fast rule or something like that. Usually you do it in the mid stage of your budget once you've finalized your baseline and you're looking at growth opportunities. So it's once you finalize the baseline, that's the first step of the budgeting process. The second step is you look at new investments for next year. So it's during that step we send out a form or a template where we collect all the costs that are going to be incurred on the new projects. So it's usually in the middle of the budgeting process after you've finalized or crystallized the baseline. Baseline is something you already are doing in the previous year and are expected to continue to do in the next year. And the second part is the growth projects or the new projects that you are planning for next year, which were not part of your baseline. So it's usually in the second part when you roll out these surveys.
Got it. And then Rajat, just to your point as well, like what is the process that you started following on how do you actually forecast out for new spend?
Basically, again, there is a baseline, which is, the tools that you want to continue. So that is the baseline. But for the new spend, we ask all the stakeholders, based on their growth and based on the requirement, they should first identify the kind of the new tools that they need to spend on, right? So at the time of budgeting process, which generally happens during the last quarter of the year, the stakeholders define that this is probably the new spend and the new tools that they would be looking for in the next year. With that, we ask the growth of their users as well, so that we can actually justify, putting or expending, certain tools based on the new user count. So based on that, we create, again, a new spend, which is again bifurcated into two things. One is expending the earlier contract, and then next one is the new tool, right? For the new tools, essentially, sometimes it happens that has not been calculated in the budget, but we want people to put some extra 10%, 15% buffer in order to just be into that budget whenever there is a requirement.
Just a quick question there, like how do you actually coach your department heads to actually forecast this out? Because very tricky, right? Like, because a bunch of there's a good Q&A question on usage-based SaaS tools, right? Usage-based tools and user-based tools. User-based tools, a lot easier, right, to forecast because it's directly proportional to headcount. But what do you do about usage-based tools actually?
Good question. So usage-based tools. So there are certain tools. For example, Datadog is a usage-based tool. Snowflake is a usage-based tool. So for such tools, probably, right, what we do is we generally ask. So in every quarter meeting, we ask people on the current usage and the usage and the forecast usage that they have, in their mind, right? And based on that, we take decisions. For example, Datadog is a prime example of overages. In Datadog, if you are just using a little more, of the committed contract, they will charge you a hefty overage. So what we can do is, like, every month or every quarter, you meet with your stakeholder, you identify the current usage and the forecasted usage, and based on the forecasted usage, then you can redefine your contract or expand the contract in a certain way that you are actually minimizing the overages in duration.
Asif, how do you tackle it in Coursera?
Usage-based tools, you check in terms of the contract what the terms are, and if you feel that you will cross the threshold in the next year, you will have an extra budget for it. We don't do it for all 100 tools. We do it for the top 10, which is 80% of the value. For example, Amazon AWS, or say Google Cloud, which we're using it very often. We're spending a lot of money on it. So it's not we do it for every tool, but for maybe the top 10 in terms of the spends. We look at the usage, what we are using right now. We look at the next year, what's there in the contract. And if we feel that we'll breach that point, then we'll account for it in the budget. So this was on the usage. On the per license tool, you've already done your headcount budget prior to doing the SaaS expense budget. So based on your new headcount that you're projecting, just like you flashed earlier, that 7,000 per user, you have a good sense how much money you spend per headcount in terms of tools. So that's how we do a rough estimate for headcount or license-based tools as well.
That's a good tidbit as well, actually. So what we started seeing is that $7,000 per employee is a great benchmark even for your usage-based stack, right? Because it actually includes your total SaaS spend as a whole. It's not just based on your license-based tools, it's actually based on even your usage-based overall cloud and SaaS spend. So it's a great way to actually just get a bird's eye view of what your usage-based budget is going to look like as well. Just to dive into the last point as well, Asif, like what do you see as the last point in this entire funnel as well? Now you've got all your spends in one place. Now you have your committed and non-committed spends. You have forecasts of your new spends now. So now how do you actually look at which is, hey, like, oh no, everything is over budget. So how do you actually now tackle point?
So if you're not constrained on the budget, it ends at step 3. But in most practical situations, we are constrained with a budget, a number that we need to meet. So in that case, we can use a couple of frameworks. The one that Rajat shared earlier is a good way to eliminate the softwares which are not being used a lot, and also they're not very critical to the business. So that's one way. What we usually do is we do a 80-20. Again, I talked about it earlier, but we do a 80-20 both in terms of the value of the contract, value of the tool, how much we spend on it, and also 80-20 in terms of the usage. So by doing this analysis, the Pareto analysis, we know that which tools are most critical and which tools are a must to have. And
Yep.
anything that falls in the bottom 5%, that is something which we can eliminate if we have a constraint or a bottleneck.
And Rajat, like, any tips for the audience on how they can actually go about optimizing their spend once now that they have it in place?
So I would actually imitate what Asif said, right? The long tail, basically 80% of their tools would be a long tail where the expense is not enough. Initially, do not focus on that. Initially, just focus on 20% of the tool. Try to identify the gaps there and try to, identify where you can save the most. For the long tail, again, it should be a focus point at the next priority, because it's easier to curb, right? Once you know that these 10 tools are not being used, just curb. But in order to remove the first top 20 tool, you need to have actually a change management of 6 months or 8 months of effort, which in general is an inhibition by the stakeholders, by the users, right? So we generally, what we do is we categorize these tools into the spend. For the top 20, top 30 tools, we have a process of identifying the value based chart that we have shown earlier. For the long tail, then we in general divide it into the tools which we know by usage is very limited. So we go to the stakeholder, directly ask them and try to curb them. If they need to be replaced or retire, we just take a decision then and there. So it's not that a problem. But again, the process, the complete process, because it's not scalable, because the main challenge that we have, even for the long tail or for the first 20 tool, is the benchmarking of price. We never know, at what price we bought versus what is the right price. And that's where the main challenge is, and that's where I guess everybody's struggling. So in general, what we do is we use a company like Spendflo, which can actually tell, which tells us the benchmark price and also the negotiated price. So it's good for us. But again, this is the process of optimization, and you need to categorize your tools into multiple categories and take a right decision on them, right? You need not to spend most of your time in the long tail, or you need not to put lesser time on the first 20 tools where you can have the maximum benefit.
Makes sense. And just to jump into, right, like, just there are some common mistakes that we see across the board while actually budgeting and forecasting, right? What are some common mistakes that Asif, both you see, and Rajat, what do you see in the entire flow?
So I can go first. So
Yeah.
One of the common mistakes, we already touched upon it earlier, not having a process or policy for approval of new tools. It's not the IT or the procurement team who's owning the approval of new tools in the organization. It's big hassle, not just in terms of budgeting and forecasting, but also it is a risk in terms of cybersecurity and data of the company. If somebody is in the company is procuring a tool without informing the IT or the procurement, then there's a bigger risk to it other than the budgeting and forecasting.
Yeah, and that implies that we don't have ownership of who the owner of the SaaS tool is, right? It's not, can't be IT, can't be procurement all the time, and can't be finance, right? So that's the most common mistake we see, is that folks just don't know who the owner of these SaaS tools are, right? And who's bought them. Rajat, like, to your point, any common mistakes that you see?
The most common mistake that I have seen, people making is, they'll decide on whether they want the tool, or they want to retire the tool, or they want to renew the tool, 10 days before the renewal date. At that particular time, you have very less level of negotiation. You have very less level of knowing whether the tool is proving the value or not. and then in a hurry or in a sudden, you just go and buy the tool at the price which can be a premium price. So you lose all your negotiation lever and all your discounts lever on the tool, and you end up paying much more than what you should pay as per the value of the tool.
Makes sense. And then, so just being proactive on your renewals, starting your renewals 120 days, 90 days before is actually the best advice that even we give to our customers as well. And the other thing that common mistake that we see is reporting out on actual versus budgeted spend on a month-on-month basis to your department heads, right? Like the department heads just don't have no idea whether what they've spent and what they've actually budgeted for in their SaaS stack every month. So reporting that out actually helps you budget on a proactive basis and a rolling basis as well, right? So I'll just quickly summarize as well. I have a last 2 to 3 minutes. One of the biggest challenges, this is a common problem that we saw, right? So you centralizing your SaaS data, categorizing your committed and non-committed spend, forecasting your new spend, and then optimizing your SaaS spends is an ongoing process. Like Rajat mentioned, it's a proactive process, right? So what we do at Spendflo is we actually unify this process in one single place. We actually become your system of record for all your SaaS data. We actually have insights into your spend, your usage, and employee sentiment of all your SaaS tools. To discover the value map, we actually have pulse surveys that we send out to all the users of the tools, the stakeholders of the tool, and we actually provide you with a graph to make data-backed renewals. We also have a wish list, which is to grab all your department heads on what are the tools that they really want to use next year, right? So we actually have a wish list that they can actually pick those tools. And we have data on what is the average spend, average utilization, and average NPS scores of these SaaS tools as well, just to make more data-backed decisions on your forecasting. And what we also do is we offer assisted purchasing and along with our price benchmarks to actually guarantee you savings on your SaaS spends as well, just to summarize as well. And you'll be able to report out on all of this so that you can actually pull this out, get it in your Excel sheets, get it in your FP&A tools, and actually start budgeting this out and forecasting it out for the next year. I just want to summarize as well. We work with a bunch of high growth companies, and one of the things that we offer is just wondering whether you folks, anyone who's attending, is like, are you interested in a free savings analysis, right? Just to get your SaaS data in one place, we'll be able to run it against our benchmarks and give you an idea of what you'll actually be able to save for the upcoming year as well. Let us know, and we're happy to help. Feel free to ask. Please email us with any questions that you have. We'll be able to get you the answers from Rajat and Asif as well. And thank you, folks, for joining. And thank you, Rajat. Thank you, Asif, for taking the time, spending the time with us. And we're right on time as well. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.